Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a major development that's making waves across Eastern Europe and could have serious geopolitical consequences: the closure of the Polish border with Belarus and how this move is effectively cutting off one of Moscow's critical lifelines. This situation is rapidly evolving, and it's not just about Poland and Belarus. This is part of a much bigger picture involving Russia, the European Union, NATO, and the shifting balance of power in the region. Let's start with the key event: Poland's decision to shut down key border crossings with Belarus. This isn't a minor diplomatic spat or a temporary measure. Poland has taken a firm and decisive step in response to escalating tensions, citing national security concerns, increased illegal crossings, and what it calls hybrid warfare tactics coming from the Belarusian side. In recent months, thousands of migrants, many allegedly facilitated by Belarusian authorities, have been directed toward the Polish border, overwhelming border security and creating a humanitarian and political crisis. Warsaw has accused Minsk of using migrants as tools in a coordinated attempt to destabilize Poland and the European Union. In retaliation, and as a preemptive security measure, Poland closed the major border checkpoints, significantly restricting the movement of goods and people between the two countries. This move has deep implications, not just for Belarus, but also for Russia. Why? Because Belarus has become one of the last major transit points for Russian goods, energy exports, and military supplies that flow toward Europe and other regions. By shutting down this corridor, Poland is not just isolating Belarus, it's also strategically hitting one of the few remaining arteries that Moscow relies on in the West. Now, let's talk about Belarus. The country is facing increasing isolation on all fronts. Since the controversial 2020 presidential election, where Alexander Lukashenko claimed victory in a vote widely seen as rigged, Belarus has been under a growing list of Western sanctions. These sanctions target everything from state enterprises to banking systems, and they have crippled much of the Belarusian economy. With the Polish border now effectively sealed, Belarus is experiencing a logistical and economic chokehold. Key exports like potash, a major fertilizer component, are stuck. Routes for trade are limited, and with airspace restrictions already in place due to earlier sanctions, Belarus is left with few options. But perhaps the most concerning part is the internal chaos that's beginning to unfold. Reports from within Belarus suggest increasing unrest, economic instability, and rising dissatisfaction among the population. Factories are slowing down due to lack of raw materials and export opportunities. Inflation is rising, and foreign currency reserves are shrinking. Lukashenko's regime, already under immense pressure, is finding it increasingly difficult to maintain control and manage the crisis. There's talk of potential unrest, especially as winter approaches and energy costs rise. For a government that's held onto power through tight control and fear, this kind of instability is dangerous. Meanwhile, Moscow is watching all of this unfold with growing concern. Belarus has long been a critical ally for Russia, not just politically, but strategically. It serves as a buffer state between Russia and NATO, and more recently, Belarus has allowed Russian troops and military hardware to be stationed within its territory, especially since the start of the war in Ukraine. In many ways, Belarus is one of the last firm friends Russia has on its western border. The collapse or further destabilization of Belarus would be a serious blow to Putin's regional ambitions. Now, with the Polish border closed, Russia is losing yet another pathway for trade and logistics. Sanctions from the European Union have already forced Moscow to reroute much of its energy exports to the east, mainly toward China and India. But those routes are longer, more expensive, and dependent on the goodwill of countries that are becoming increasingly cautious in their dealings with Russia. The border closure also adds to the logistical nightmares for the Russian military, especially if it wants to move troops or equipment westward. What makes this more dramatic is the timing. The Ukraine conflict is still raging on. Russia is trying to maintain pressure on the front lines but it's facing growing resistance and resource depletion. Meanwhile, NATO is reinforcing its eastern flank, and countries like Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia are ramping up defense spending and troop deployments. The border closure is not just a symbolic move. It's a strategic maneuver aimed at tightening the noose around both Belarus and Russia. Some analysts believe Poland's move is also a message to the European Union, and NATO a signal that Eastern European countries are prepared to take decisive action to protect their sovereignty and push back against aggression. It's worth noting that Poland has been one of Ukraine's strongest supporters since the beginning of the war and has taken in millions of refugees. By shutting its border with Belarus, Poland is not just reacting to migration, it's proactively disrupting what it sees as a coordinated effort by Moscow and Minsk to undermine European stability. This situation also puts the European Union in a difficult spot. While many Western European nations have supported sanctions against Belarus and Russia, they've also been cautious not to escalate tensions further. Poland's bold move forces the EU to respond either by backing Warsaw and increasing pressure on Belarus, or by seeking dialogue, which may be seen as weakness. Either way, the geopolitical chessboard is shifting quickly. On the ground, the people most affected are ordinary Belarusians. With the economy faltering, supply chains disrupted, and political freedoms severely restricted, life is getting harder. Many are trying to flee the country, but with borders closing and visa restrictions tightening, options are limited. The regime continues to crack down on dissent, arresting journalists, activists, and anyone suspected of opposing Lukashenko's rule. The atmosphere is tense, and many fear a return to Soviet-style repression. To make matters worse, there are reports of growing tension between Belarusian citizens and Russian troops stationed in the country. As the costs of hosting Russian forces grow, and as resentment builds over Belarus being dragged deeper into Moscow's conflicts, cracks may begin to form in what was once a seemingly solid alliance. If Belarus starts to push back even subtly against Russian influence, it could create a ripple effect across the region. So where is this all headed? It's hard to say with certainty, but a few possibilities are emerging. First, Belarus may become even more dependent on Russia, economically and militarily. With the West shutting its doors, Moscow becomes the only viable partner left, but at a steep price. This could effectively turn Belarus into a satellite state, with limited sovereignty. Second, internal unrest in Belarus could grow, possibly leading to widespread protests or even a political crisis. Third, the regional security situation may escalate further, especially if Russia views Poland's actions as a provocation. One thing is clear, the closure of the Polish-Belarusian border is not an isolated event. It's part of a broader power struggle playing out in Eastern Europe, with Russia, Belarus, Poland, and the EU all entangled in a complex and dangerous web of politics, security, and survival. The world should be paying attention because what happens in this region could have far-reaching consequences for the rest of Europe and beyond. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates on this developing story and other major geopolitical events. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.